The summer sun had finally dipped below the city's skyline, trading the day's heavy heat for the softer, cooler air of the evening. For one man, this shift marked the beginning of a long-awaited celebration. He was a police officer, a man known and generally well-liked in his community. He had served for over 15 years, a fact that filled him with a quiet pride. Tonight he was off duty, and the uniform hanging neatly in his closet at home felt a world away. He was just a man now, out with his friends from the station to mark a colleague's promotion. The bar they chose was a popular spot, loud and packed with the happy noise of people letting go of the week's stress. The air was thick with the smell of fried food and the sound of clinking glasses and laughter. He settled onto a stool at the crowded wooden bar, a familiar face among friends. The first drink went down smoothly, a cool relief. The second one followed, and then a third. With each round, the tight coil of responsibility he carried every day began to loosen. The loud conversations around him started to blend into a pleasant hum. His laughter became a little louder, his gestures a little broader. The careful control he exercised on the job was slowly being drowned out by the alcohol swimming in his veins. He was slipping not all at once but piece by piece without even realizing it. Not far from the noisy bar in a much quieter part of the neighborhood, a young woman was also enjoying her evening. She was 19, a college student with a bright future and a calm, thoughtful way about her. She had spent the night at a friend's apartment just a few blocks from her own home, watching movies and talking about their dreams. It was a simple, happy night. When it was time to leave, she said her goodbyes and stepped out into the warm night air. Deciding to walk the short distance home, she pulled her hoodie a little tighter and put in her earbuds, a soft melody soundtracking her walk. The city around her was settling down. The streets were quiet, lit by the soft orange glow of the streetlights. She felt safe. This was her neighborhood, a path she had walked many times before. Her mind was on her classes, on a conversation she'd had with her mother earlier, on the simple, ordinary thoughts of a young adult. She was completely unaware that her path was about to collide with a storm she never saw coming. Back at the bar, the officer's celebration was winding down, or perhaps it had already spiraled out of control. His friends had begun to leave, clapping him on the back and heading home to their families. But he wasn't ready for the night to end. The alcohol had taken full hold now, clouding his judgment and whispering that he was invincible. He paid his tab, stumbling slightly as he stood up from the stool. He pushed through the heavy door of the bar and emerged onto the sidewalk, the cool air doing little to clear his foggy mind. He decided to cut through a large, well-lit parking lot that served as a shortcut to the main road, where he could hopefully find a taxi. His walk was unsteady, his feet not quite cooperating. The parking lot was mostly empty at this hour, a vast concrete space dotted with pools of light from tall lampposts. It was in this space, under the bright artificial light, that their two worlds violently crashed together. The young woman was walking through the same parking lot, her own home just on the other side. She saw the man ahead, weaving slightly, and a small, cautious instinct made her slow her pace. She thought about crossing to the other side, but before she could act, he noticed her. His eyes, glazed and unfocused, locked onto her. He changed his direction, moving to intercept her path. Her heart gave a little jump. She pulled one earbud out, the music still faintly playing in the other. "Hey there," the man slurred, his voice too loud for the quiet space. He was standing too close now, invading the comfortable distance between strangers. She tried to step around him, muttering a quiet, "I'm just going home." But he moved with her, blocking her way. The friendly mask he might have worn earlier in the evening was gone, replaced by something that felt predatory and unsettling. The smell of alcohol on his breath was strong. In that moment, he was not a protector, not a public servant. The authority his badge usually represented had twisted into something else entirely. A sense of entitlement, a dangerous belief that the rules no longer applied to him. He reached out a hand, his movements clumsy but deliberate. He grabbed her arm, his grip firm. Fear, cold and sharp, shot through her body. This wasn't happening. This couldn't be real. Before her brain could even form a clear thought, before she could scream or fight, he pulled her forcefully toward him. The world tilted. The parking lot, the lights, the distant sound of a car, it all blurred into a terrifying nightmare. And then he kissed her. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a violation, an act of force that stole her sense of safety in an instant. It was a single shocking moment that would change both of their lives forever, setting into motion a chain of events that no one, especially the intoxicated officer, could have ever predicted. The world snapped back into a terrible, harsh focus. The kiss lasted only a few seconds, but for the young woman it felt like an eternity. Her mind, which had frozen in sheer disbelief, suddenly screamed back to life. A surge of raw energy, a mix of terror and fury, exploded through her body. This was wrong. This was a violation she had done nothing to invite. She reacted not with a plan, but with pure instinct. Her hands, which had been pinned at her sides, flew up and shoved hard against the man's chest. He was bigger and heavier, but the force of her push, fueled by adrenaline, was enough to make him stagger back a single step. His grip on her arm loosened just enough for her to wrench herself free. The sudden movement made him stumble, his balance already stolen by the alcohol. A sound tore from her throat, a short, sharp scream of, "Get off me!" It wasn't a long, dramatic cry, but a guttural, powerful command that cut through the quiet hum of the night. The sound seemed to hang in the air between them, a clear line separating what had been a normal evening from this new, frightening reality. The man stood there blinking, as if he was only just realizing what he had done. The aggressive confidence he had shown a moment before seemed to drain from his face, replaced by a confused, dazed expression. He looked at the young woman, really looked at her, perhaps seeing the fear and anger in her eyes for the first time. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe an excuse, maybe another slurred word, but nothing came out. The young woman didn't wait to find out. Her only thought was to put distance between them. She took several quick, stumbling steps backward, her heart hammering against her ribs like a wild bird. She kept her eyes locked on him, afraid that if she looked away he would lunge at her again. Her mind was racing, a frantic torrent of thoughts. Who is he? Is he going to chase me? Where can I run? Her eyes darted around the vast, empty parking lot. It felt exposed and dangerous now, not safe and familiar. The bright lampposts that usually felt welcoming now felt like spotlights on her terror. She needed to get out of there. But she also knew she couldn't just run and let him get away. He would just do this to someone else. Then a clear, solid thought broke through the panic. The phone. Call for help. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely control them. She fumbled in her pocket, her fingers closing around the cool, hard rectangle of her mobile phone. It felt like a lifeline. She unlocked it, her thumb slipping on the screen. The man was still standing there watching her, but he made no move to come closer. It was as if her scream had stunned him into inaction. With trembling fingers, she opened the phone app and pressed the 3 numbers she had known since she was a little child. 911. She pressed the phone to her ear, the sound of the ringing tone a stark electronic beat in the heavy silence. Each ring felt like an hour. She kept her eyes glued to the man, ready to run at the slightest movement. Finally, a calm, professional voice answered. "Owen, what is your emergency?" The sound of another human voice, a voice of authority, gave her a sliver of strength. Her own voice came out in a rushed, breathless gasp. "Hello? I'm in the parking lot next to Main Street. A man. He just attacked me. He grabbed me and he kissed me. I didn't know him. He just came up to me." The dispatcher on the other end of the line kept her voice steady and reassuring. "Okay, I need you to stay calm. You're doing great. Are you safe right now? Is the man still there?" "Yes, he's still here. He's just standing there," she said, her voice shaking. She described the man as best she could in her frightened state. What he was wearing, his approximate height and build, the fact that he seemed very drunk. She gave the dispatcher the exact location, her eyes scanning the nearby buildings for street signs or business names. Meanwhile, the police officer, hearing her describe him to the 911 operator, seemed to wake up from his stupor. A new kind of fear flashed across his face, not fear of the young woman, but fear of the consequences. The word police was probably ringing in his ears. He was the police. This was what he was supposed to stop. The sheer horrifying irony of the situation began to dawn on him, cutting through the alcoholic haze. He took a half step forward, his hands coming up in a gesture that was maybe meant to be placating. Wait, just hold on," he slurred. The young woman immediately took several more steps back, putting more distance between them.
"Stay away from me,"
she said into the phone, but loud enough for him to hear. "He's coming closer." The dispatcher's voice was firm. "Do not approach her, sir. Units are on their way. They will be there in just a couple of minutes. Just stay on the line with me. Can you see any cars arriving?" The young woman scanned the edges of the parking lot, her body tense with anticipation. Every second felt stretched out, unbearable. The man had stopped moving again, running a hand over his face as if trying to wipe away the situation. The initial shock was wearing off, leaving a cold, sick feeling in the pit of her stomach. She was alone in a dark parking lot with a man who had assaulted her, waiting for the very people he worked with to arrive. She didn't know if they would believe her. She didn't know what would happen next. The world had become a very uncertain and scary place, all in the space of 60 terrifying seconds. The sound of the sirens grew from a distant wail to a piercing shriek, cutting through the tense silence of the parking lot. For the young woman, the noise was a promise of safety, a signal that help was almost here. For the man, it was a terrifying alarm bell, making the situation feel more real and more dangerous than ever before. 2 police cars, their lights flashing a frantic blue and red, turned into the entrance of the parking lot. Their headlights swept across the scene, immediately illuminating the young woman standing alone and the man a short distance away. The cars came to a quick stop, their doors flying open almost at the same time. 2 officers stepped out. They were young, with alert eyes that quickly scanned the area, assessing the situation for any immediate danger. Their hands rested near their belts, ready but not drawn. They saw a frightened young woman on the phone and a disheveled man who was now slowly standing up from the curb. The young woman felt a wave of overwhelming relief wash over her. She lowered her phone, her hands still shaking. "They're here," she whispered to the dispatcher, who told her she could hang up now. The officers approached carefully. One of them, a man with a calm demeanor, went straight to the young woman. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice steady and professional. "Are you the one who called us?" She nodded, her words coming out in a rush. "Yes, it was him. He grabbed me and he wouldn't let me go." She pointed a trembling finger towards the man. The other officer, a woman, had already moved to intercept the man. He was standing now, swaying slightly on his feet. The smell of alcohol was strong, even from a few feet away. His eyes were glassy and unfocused. "Sir, can you tell me what's going on here?" the female officer asked him. What happened next was something none of them expected. The man didn't try to run or argue. Instead, he looked at the officer, and a strange, almost pleading look came over his face. He reached slowly into his back pocket. Both officers tensed, their hands moving. "Sir, keep your hands where I can see them," the female officer commanded sharply. But he was just pulling out a small black leather wallet. He fumbled it open, his clumsy fingers struggling with the clasp. He held it out, showing the shiny badge inside and the official identification card next to it. "I'm one of you," he slurred, the words thick and messy in his mouth. "I'm a cop. From the 12th precinct. This is just a big misunderstanding." A heavy, stunned silence fell over the group. The 2 responding officers looked from the badge to the man's face and then back at the young woman. Their professional masks didn't crack, but you could see the surprise in their eyes. This changed things. This made everything much more complicated and much more serious. The young woman's heart sank. Her fear came rushing back, colder and sharper than before. He's a police officer? The thought was terrifying. Would they believe her? Would they take his side? Would they tell her it was just a mistake and send her on her way? The trust she had felt just moments ago began to feel very fragile. The male officer who was with her saw the fresh fear in her eyes. He spoke to her quietly. "Ma'am, it doesn't matter who he is. We are here to help you. Just give us a moment, okay?" Meanwhile, the female officer was still dealing with the man. She did not lower her guard. She looked at the badge, then back at him. "Sir, I need you to step away from the curb and put your hands on the hood of the car," she instructed, her voice firm and leaving no room for argument. The man looked confused, even a little hurt. "You don't understand," he mumbled. But he did as he was told, stumbling towards the patrol car and placing his hands flat on the cool metal. The 2 officers exchanged a look. It was a quick, silent conversation. They had a credible complainant, a young woman who was clearly shaken up, and they had a fellow officer who was clearly, undeniably drunk in public and was accused of a serious crime. The rules were clear. Their duty was clear. The male officer stayed with the young woman, getting her initial statement. He listened carefully, writing everything down in a small notebook. He asked gentle questions, making sure he had the story right. The female officer stayed with the man on the car. She asked him for his version of events. His story was rambling and confused. He couldn't explain clearly why he was in the parking lot or what had happened. He just kept repeating that it was a mistake and that he was one of them. It was painfully obvious that his word could not be trusted in his current state. The evidence was right in front of them. The young woman's clear, frightened account against the man's drunken, slurred ramblings. The female officer spoke into her shoulder radio, calling for a supervisor to come to the scene. This was now a situation that required a higher rank. The routine call had just become anything but routine. The young woman watched all of this, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. She saw the man leaning against the police car, his head bowed. She saw the officers doing their job with a quiet, serious efficiency. The initial shock was wearing off, and she was starting to understand the immense weight of what was happening. She had reported a crime, and the person she had reported was a police officer. She had no idea what was going to happen next, but she could feel that the night was far from over. The arrival of the second police car changed everything. The flashing blue and red lights painted the parking lot in sweeping, urgent colors. The two young officers who had been first on the scene visibly straightened up as a taller, older officer with a sergeant's stripes on his sleeve stepped out of the new vehicle. He had a calm but serious presence, and his eyes quickly took in the whole situation. He walked over to his officers and they huddled together, speaking in low, serious tones. The young woman could see them glancing over at her, and then at the man still sitting on the curb. She watched as the senior officer's expression grew darker and more grim. He nodded slowly, listening to everything his officers were telling him. Then the sergeant walked over to her. His approach was careful and not at all threatening. "Ma'am," he said, his voice low and steady. "My name is Sergeant Evans. I'm going to need to ask you a few questions if that's all right. Can you tell me what happened in your own words?" So she told him. Her voice was quieter now, the initial shock giving way to a deep, trembling exhaustion. She told him about walking home, about the man stepping into her path, the smell of alcohol, the grab, the kiss, the push, and the phone call. She spoke in a flat tone, just stating the facts as she remembered them. The sergeant listened without interrupting, his eyes focused on her, showing her that he was taking every word seriously. When she was finished, he gave a single, firm nod. "Thank you," he said. "You have been very brave. I need you to stay right here with Officer Miller for a moment, okay? We are going to take care of this." The word brave felt strange to her. She didn't feel brave. She felt scared and tired. But his words, his tone, they made her feel for the first time that she might be believed. The sergeant then turned and walked towards the man on the curb. The man looked up, a flicker of recognition in his eyes. "Sarge?" he mumbled, starting to stand up. "Stay seated," the sergeant said, his voice losing its gentle tone and becoming all business. He stood over the man, his posture rigid. "Stand up slowly," he instructed. "I need you to perform a field sobriety test." The man struggled to his feet, swaying slightly. The sergeant pulled out a small flashlight. "I'm going to check your eyes," he said, shining the light slowly from side to side. The man's eyes didn't track the light smoothly. They jerked and stuttered, a classic sign of severe intoxication. "Now I want you to walk in a straight line," the sergeant said, pointing. "Heel to toe for 9 steps, the man tried. He lifted his foot, but he wobbled violently, putting his foot down wide to stop himself from falling. He tried again, taking 2 clumsy, staggering steps before he had to put his arms out to balance himself. It was a complete failure. It was painfully obvious to everyone watching that he was heavily under the influence. The sergeant's face was like stone. He had seen enough. The evidence was right in front of him, the young woman's clear and credible story, the man's own admission that he was an officer, and this undeniable public display of his drunkenness. The sergeant looked at the 2 younger officers and gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. One of the officers, the one who had first spoken to the young woman, stepped forward. He had a solemn look on his face. He approached his fellow officer, the man he might have shared coffee with that very morning. "Sir," the young officer said, his voice formal and loud enough for everyone to hear, "please place your hands behind your back. You are under arrest." The words hung in the night air. For a moment, the drunk officer just stared as if he couldn't understand the language. This was a ritual he had performed dozens of times. He knew the words by heart, but hearing them directed at him seemed to break something in his mind. "This is, you know me," he slurred, his voice a mix of confusion and pleading. "Hands behind your back, sir. Now." the officer repeated, his tone leaving no room for argument. Slowly, with great reluctance, the man turned and put his hands behind his back. The young officer pulled a pair of cold metal handcuffs from his belt. The metallic click as they snapped shut around the man's wrists was a small, sharp sound, but in the quiet of the parking lot, it was as loud as thunder. It was the sound of a life and a career, shattering in an instant. The officer then began to speak the Miranda warning, the same one the drunk officer had recited to so many others. You have the right to remain silent. The man just stared at the ground, the reality of his situation finally crashing down on him. The alcohol could no longer shield him from the truth. The young woman watched, her hand over her mouth. She felt a whirlwind of emotions. There was a sense of relief that she was being believed. There was a strange, sad feeling seeing a grown man being put in handcuffs, and there was a sense of shock at how fast and how seriously the police were taking her word over one of their own. The officers guided the handcuffed man toward the back door of the second patrol car. He didn't resist. He moved like a man in a terrible dream, his head bowed. They placed a hand on his head, guiding him into the back seat just like they would for any other suspect. They closed the door, sealing him inside. Through the window, he was just a silhouette, a fallen figure alone in the cage of his own car. The blue and red lights continued to flash, reflecting off the glass, illuminating the face of a man who had, in one terrible decision, lost everything. The system he had sworn to uphold had just held him accountable. The badge no longer protected him. Tonight, he was not a police officer. He was just a man who had committed a crime. The ride to the police station was a quiet, lonely journey for the man in the back of the squad car. He sat slumped against the window, the cold metal of the handcuffs digging into his wrists. The flashing lights from the car ahead reflected in the glass, painting his face in alternating shades of blue and red. Each flash felt like a public announcement of his shame. The alcohol was finally wearing off, and in its place was a crushing, sickening clarity. He thought about his family, about his friends at the station, about the life he had spent over 15 years building. In one stupid, reckless moment, he had thrown it all away. He closed his eyes, but there was no escape from the thoughts in his head. Meanwhile, the young woman was taken to the station in a separate car. An officer, a kind-faced woman, sat with her in a quiet interview room, offering her a cup of tea that she held but did not drink. She gave her full statement again, slowly and carefully, while another officer typed it all into a computer. They treated her with a gentle respect that helped calm her shaking hands. They explained what would happen next, that the man would be charged and that there would be a process. It all felt very formal and strange. Before she left, the female officer gave her a card with a phone number for a victim support service. What you did was very courageous, the officer said. You protected yourself and you made sure he can't do this to anyone else tonight. The next morning, the news began to spread. It started as a quiet rumor in the police station, a hushed, disbelieving conversation over coffee. You heard about Miller? Then it hit the local news. The story was straightforward. An off-duty officer had been arrested for assault and sexual battery. The police department did not try to hide it or make excuses. In fact, the police chief called a press conference that very afternoon. The young woman watched the press conference on the local news at her friend's apartment. She saw the police chief, a serious-looking man, step up to a podium filled with microphones. He did not mince his words. Last night, the chief said, one of our own betrayed the oath he swore to uphold. He betrayed the public's trust, and he betrayed every single officer who puts on this uniform with honor. His actions are a stain on this department, and they are in no way a reflection of the values we stand for. He went on to announce that the officer had been immediately fired and was facing criminal charges. We hold ourselves to a higher standard, the chief said, his voice firm. When an officer breaks the law, they are not one of us anymore. They are a suspect, and they will be treated like any other suspect. We commend the young victim for her incredible bravery in coming forward, and for her presence of mind in a terrifying situation. Her courage ensured that justice was served swiftly. Hearing those words from the police chief was a powerful moment for the young woman. It felt like a validation, a confirmation from the highest level that she had done the right thing. The system had worked. It had been tested, and it had held firm. For the former officer, the consequences continued to fall like heavy rain. He was processed and booked into the county jail. They took his fingerprints and his photograph. The mugshot was a stark, ugly thing. His eyes were puffy and red. his face pale and filled with a deep regret. This picture was a world away from the clean, proud official photo that had hung on the department's website just the day before. He was assigned a lawyer and eventually released on bail, but he was a man without a job, without his reputation, and facing a future that was uncertain and frightening. The story, of course, caused a stir in the community. People were angry and shocked, but many were also surprised and relieved by the police department's swift and decisive action. Community leaders spoke out, condemning the officer's crime but also acknowledging that the system had responded correctly. It became a story not just about a crime, but about accountability. In the days that followed, the young woman tried to return to her normal life. She went to her college classes, she met with her friends, but she was changed. Sometimes she would feel a sudden jump of fear if someone walked too close to her on the street. The memory of that night would pop into her head at unexpected moments. It was a scar, and she knew it would take time to heal. She decided to call the victim support number on the card. It was a small step, but an important one. The story doesn't have a perfectly happy ending because real life is often messy. The legal case against the former officer would drag on for months in the courts. The young woman knew she would have to testify to relive that night all over again. It was a daunting thought, but the story does have an ending about courage and consequence. It shows that no one is above the law, no matter what uniform they wear. It shows that one person's bravery to speak up can trigger a chain of justice. The young woman, whose ordinary night was shattered, found a strength inside herself she never knew she had. And the police department, faced with a terrible act by one of its own, proved that its true duty was not to protect its members, but to protect the public and the rule of law. The final lesson was a simple but powerful one. Integrity is not about never making a mistake. It is about how you respond when a terrible mistake is made. In this case, when tested, the system did not break. It bent and it held.